Good morning, everyone. It always worries me when people applaud before the presentation rather than after. I might also mention, I didn't actually put in my resume in the bio that I'm a former CIO. I've been CIO in a number of multinationals, and 2.5 years ago I decided I want to go it alone. I want to take on the world, as it were. So I come from a fairly eclectic background, fairly broad experience. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, take you on a bit of a journey where we're all in the current state, and I want to basically take a journey through to the future state. Now, the future state might be something in 12 months' time, it could be 2 weeks' time, it could be 10 years' time. It's really up to you to work that out. So the journey I'd like to take you on the agenda is as follows. Basically, try and get a perspective on cloud. What is it? What's the gorilla in the room? Put some context around it that may relate to local government. What are the opportunities? Try and kick that can down the road. What are some of the pitfalls? And there's a long list, but there's also a long list of opportunities, so it's getting that balance right. And more importantly, what's next? Where to from here? So basically, the way in which I see the cloud market, and this is I think, slowly maturing as organisations go through the angst and trauma and dramas of moving organisations to the cloud. It's pretty much this sort of story, because in here you've got vendors pushing solutions, you've got cloud evangelists, I love the word evangelist, which is cloud's everything. You've got naysayers who are hanging on to the tin huggers, I think they're called, holding on to the servers that never let to be. You've got job protection, you've got uncertainty, you've got Patriot Act, you've got all these issues buried in this whole mix. So as a CEO of an organisation or someone who's in the line of business, how the hell do you make sense of this? Because it's your skin in the game. At the end of the day, everyone's going to help you push yourself into the cloud, but when the music stops, who's going to be left in the room? So that's the fundamental concern with organisations that are trying to get their heads around this. So hopefully in the next 40 minutes we'll hopefully get you to a position where you at least can go forward with some sort of confidence. I run a little podcast channel which I've done for about the last 18 months, and I interview people from time to time about cloud. I'm not just pushing information out there. I'm not selling anything. I'll just say, this is information, see if it works for you guys. I did a Trend Micro last year, the Cloud Evolve thing. I was a keynote speaker, and I bumped into Dave Asprey. This fellow here is the Global VP of Cloud Security, and I'll quote his definition, which I love. It's forget the technical definition of cloud. Ask your mother what the cloud is, and that's not my mother, by the way. And she'll tell you that it means it's not on my computer. Now, if that's all you need to know about cloud, that's all you need to know. It's just not on your computer. It's somewhere else. It's not in your data center. It's somewhere else. Moreover, if you have a standard outsourcing contract or a supply contract which has got a pay-as-you-go type thing, it's really a matter of opinion whether it's cloud or not. Does that resonate with those that are in the cloud or trying to get in the cloud? But see, the whole capex versus opex argument is a false one, in my view, because most enterprises commit to a cloud solution for a number of years. Most enterprises don't go to the cloud for 2 weeks and then switch it off. They don't go to the cloud for 12 months, switch it off. And most vendor contracts are multi-year. If you look at Salesforce, it's a minimum 12 months with an auto rollover in the 9-month period, which is, you've got Google, Salesforce, Amazon, you can switch it off and on, but once you've moved your whole enterprise to that, it's not an easy exercise to just switch off. At the end of the day, that's the sort of issue that you're faced with, is you're paying on a pay-as-you-go kind of basis. It presents also risk. It presents a paradox, because on the one hand, one of the fundamental benefits of cloud is you don't need to worry about all the stuff that's behind your screen or browser or the app or whatever it is. It's taken care of by someone else. But if you're serious about good governance, trying to look under the covers to find out where this data center is, what level of governance, what level of control they have, and kick the can down the road, as it were, it's actually quite difficult. And don't just think of the major players like Google and the rest. What you're really also looking at is Australian providers. Generally, from my experience, actually, if there's an Australian data centre, they'll actually say, come and have a look at how we operate. within reason. So that's the paradox. So for those that understand about cloud, I might just say for the next couple of minutes, you're welcome to check your emails and nod off, and I'll snap my fingers and try and wake everyone when I'm just trying to get through the basics of cloud. There's 4 basic flavours of cloud computing. At the basic level, you have public, and that's what you get with Google and the well-known sort of cloud applications. You've got no control. You can't tell Google what to do. You can, but even you can try. You have no ownership. You own the data, but the applications stay behind. So you can click a button, get your data out. Whether you can use your data is a separate issue, but you can get your data out. Private cloud, this is where you have a cloud capability internal and or under contract where you know where it is. You control, you may own, could be in a financing arrangement. You define the architecture and you define your security position. Hybrid is basically mix and match. Hybrid is generally most organisations, you always have some legacy systems. You're not going to, there are some organisations that are 100% cloud, and those that are successful have spent an awful lot amount of time on due diligence. But when it comes to the combination of these, the integration and interfacing is quite significant because of the lack of common standards. There's volatility in the market and whatever. We'll talk about that briefly in a second. And then community cloud, and this is why I put a box around it, because maybe for the local government community, the community cloud concept may be relevant, it may not be, depends on the strategy. So the 3 classic ingredients of cloud, you've probably all heard and seen this, but infrastructure, platform and software. Basically going from the metal operating system and the stuff you use. The stuff you use is that stuff. And the view I have is this where the complexity and risk increases the further you go up the stack. Now the reason I say that is that because when you get to the software layer, you're counting on the SaaS vendor in order to provide all the multi-tenancy for your data. So you've got 100,000 clients or 100,000 people sharing this big data center. The multi-tenancy, the walls around it, how are they controlled? You also hope they've written their applications well, rigorously, with appropriate security. They've locked down their databases. So this is the kind of thing that you really need to be mindful of. So Gartner, and I only use Gartner, once if I can help it. Their prediction, I think, is probably understated. Where in 5 years they're predominantly deploying in a hybrid mode. Certainly from my experience, just about most organisations are already well into hybrid cloud technologies at this point in time. So one thing I'd like to do is just get you to stand back and consider this perspective. Enterprise IT, from my perspective, as if you think of it as a cube, there's 3 dimensions to the cube. One of which is cost, the other one's value, and the other one's risk. Because if you look at large enterprise, it's high value because it can deliver a lot of value. It can be high cost, and you have to open the textbooks and business cases on large enterprises, government and private, that have spent millions of dollars on failed IT projects. And also risk, because we all know our information is in there. So I want to focus on 2 dimensions, value and cost. The perspective I have is that the application layer has the potential, and this is where the transformation occurs. You don't really get transformation. Most of the activity in terms of moving to the cloud is infrastructure type stuff. This is where the transformation really occurs in the business, because this is a software layer that drives your business. That contains all your business logic, all your workflow, all your smarts are in there. The reason I say that is you can always reduce your costs to 0, but transformational value is not capped. So most people entering the cloud at the enterprise level that are going specifically on cost reduction sometimes get burnt, because cloud is not necessarily a low-cost option. There's also an organisation called COSO. Here's the website, and there's a link which I'll be providing this copy of the presentations to everyone. They're an organisation which provides thought leadership in the development of frameworks and guidance, enterprise risk management, internal control and fraud deterrence. If you can't read it, it's a really document you can download. It's quite a good read. But one of the key things is the matrix here, which relates to software as a service, platform infrastructure. That's the delivery model. We have less control up at the top end because it's software as a service. You don't, as I said before, you don't really own it. And the deployment is public, hybrid, and public. So that's their view on the risk, which is a slight variation to, I guess, the one I've done, because their curve is a little bit more gentle. So this is a crystal ball, which is a metaphor for where are we going, what are we doing, where's this taking us to, and taking us to at every level. We all have smartphones, which are essentially very smart cloud access devices, through to enterprise legacy systems. Where's this whole thing taking us to? There's a US organisation called the Office of Director of National Intelligence, and I always think national intelligence seems oxymoron on a good day. But I found this to be quite a useful document, which basically, and there's a reference to it, so feel free to download it. I think it's 160 pages or whatever. There's some really good stuff in there, because this really makes you stand back and look at the broader picture. The top global megatrend for the foreseeable future is individual empowerment, which was exactly what this whole concept of moving to crowdsourcing and all these other issues that all play into this. So I think in terms of getting some broad context, it's the democratization at every level is leading to the transformation in cloud. So within the government context, the potential for cross-organisation collaboration to achieve joint outcomes is a reality. I think cloud is at the maturity, assuming one selects the right solutions and applications. The question is, from an organisational perspective, and this is not a technology issue, what's the appetite for change? Is it possible to herd cats, or how's that change going to be managed and initiated? The opportunities for local governments to maximise the upside potential of these new and disruptive technologies. The cloud is only one of an ecosystem of disruptive technologies, and putting in that context. So there really should be some, and I don't want to be prescriptive about it, but there should, to maximise the value, there should be some overall umbrella IT strategy. Now, where that is held, I have no idea. I guess local governments and governments at all levels are no different to any multinational corporation, which has got different regions, silos, functions, business units. And fragmentation of IT systems, technologies and related services contributes to a duplication of effort. And that goes across every business, whether it's government or private. There's always where you get duplication. And the flip side to that is granularity, which can be of huge value to the business as well, to the organisation. I think limited budget and resourcing at the local government level, I think it's a well-known fact. You only have to open the paper and read all the carry-on at federal government with budget deficits and everything else. We're probably all going to be facing cuts left, right and centre, and that'll trickle down across the board. And then also the structure of state, federal governments is sitting across this active fault line with occasional, stoush between who owns what. Classic is the brickbats with funding on healthcare and a whole range of issues. But essentially, how does this influence local government's willingness to embark on essentially a statewide perspective on how IT could be used? Is it really kind of an independent issue? Do you try and run with it independently of the powers above? Why not just try and set some context for this whole discussion? Essentially, my reading of this, local government IT is very operationally focused, because local government is about delivery of services. If you look at the different tiers of government, federal government is the one that has got the big buckets of money for innovation, as it were. It tends not to be the case that, I mean, you may have some innovation funding in your local council, but certainly in terms of the big bucks, it's a very operationally focused business, which is by necessity, it's what ratepayers expect of your services. But also recognising technology-initiated disruptions is the norm, and it's neither a simple or easy task to respond to this volatility with your legacy systems. You've got legacy Outlook sitting on your server, you've got legacy apps that you've done, and this is where we're going from the current state to the future state is part of the challenge. Budgetary pressures, austerity, think GFC and other factors, and also the bigger question is long-term thinking is the key. And most governments, I think, and most organisations, from my experience, struggle with balancing the short-term demands versus the long-term decision-making. So innovation, speed and agility is not easy, and I think we're all in the same, hopefully on the same page in this particular one, because trying to bring it all together is not a trivial task. So shifting away from locally developed, in-house or even bespoke non-integrated legacy systems towards something, cloud or whatever, is not necessarily a trivial exercise. Increasingly, the society around us is increasingly tech-savvy, who are probably expecting more sort of user-friendly, deeper penetration of services, information aggregation, the big data concept of mashing data sources together is all out there. And the expectation management is probably something that is a topic in its own right. So what I would like to do is cover off four broad footprints. Think of it as a four-legged bar stool here. Technology changes. First one is seduction of being spoiled for choice, which is pretty much everyone's out there with a particular application or particular something that you can just use. Political reality, governance and standardization. Now this is, in this presentation, I think it's, if I drew the analogy, it's like what I'm trying to do is blow on the snowflake on top of the iceberg, because there's a whole lot of issues below here. It's very context specific, but I'm trying to touch on the key ones. So, what's the perceived value, and this should be a question actually, I forgot the question mark. What is the perceived value of a specific cloud offering versus the actual value? And this is something that organisations try and struggle with, because it has at its heart the value justification for, say for example, a new CRM system. So you might find part of the business saying, we want to put in Salesforce or Zoho or whatever it is because we're going to be reducing our cost by X dollars. Now that's kind of a bit hard to actually prove or disprove ultimately. It's not always clear-cut issues. So the other issue is cloud lowers or can eliminate the barrier to entry, because you just need a credit card and you're in. So you don't need anything. The barrier to entry is zero, which leads to the phenomenon of shadow IT, which you're probably aware of. We'll talk about later if we want to. The cloud market's an initiative, volatile, new products are coming on a daily basis. Things are happening very quickly. Local government IT departments, I would imagine, don't have an awful lot of free time. Not a lot of looking out of the window and heading down to the pub. And the key thing is transforming limited IT resources to doing value adding, move them up the value chain, so people, instead of just maintaining service, keeping the lights and water on, actually doing value added tasks. Because the view I have, and this is a separate topic, is that IT has a unique perspective on most organisations that is undervalued. Pay as you go removes the need for capital, so the old capex justification big bang is done away with. But obviously we'll talk about that a bit later, but that's the contra with what's the net present value or the total cost of ownership discussion hides the reality of the pay as you go model. The real risk of a fragmented, inconsistent array of cloud applications, which is poorly integrated, compounds the problem. And I'm seeing a fair bit of this in what I do. my advisory practice. In fact, one of the students I'm supervising he finished his Masters last year. He and I are trying to get a paper peer-reviewed out in the academic press, which surveyed 4 or 5 organisations in detail. The independent cloud journey, some went in very successfully, others went in and found major problems as she came back out. So there's a lot of learnings in there in terms of what you could do in the short term can actually compound your future challenges. So showcasing a series of cloud vendors without understanding the key organisational drivers may not be in LG's best interest. You go to an expo where you say, well, here's 150 suppliers, go and take your pick. May or may not be in the best interest. Political reality. The question is, at what level of government should a technology strategy sit? Is there I have no idea. I'm from New South Wales, so I can tick the box saying I'm ignorant, but the issue is at what level is a policy, if there is such a policy, struck? And what influence does local government have to elevate the discussion to, for example, this national level? I don't know. The balance between local loss of control and a coherent, well thought through umbrella IT strategy needs to be struck to do a couple of things, and this is like maximise the value, inverted commas value, cash, benefit or intangibles. Maximise collaboration between councils, minimise cost, both short-term and TCO, that's sometimes the kicker. Minimise risk, or at least identify them with some precision and then mitigate those risks. Minimise the risks associated with opportunistic vendor predation. This is a real fertile territory for vendors to predate. The lion sitting under a tree waiting for the buck to come past. I call it pet shop marketing, traditionally. It's like, take the puppy home for the weekend, and if the kids don't like it, bring it back by all means. So it's like seductive, the whole seduction of and that was the very first slide I put up there. Develop a relevant vendor management strategy. Vendor management is something which is quite significant because when you're moving to essentially outsource, arm's length, kind of trusting model, the vendor management is much broader. I wrote this is an article, in fact my last column in, I think it was CFO, was about vendor management, that one of the key things is shifting away from just contract negotiation. It's a holistic vendor management strategy which I think goes hand in hand with this. Governance, mapping the inventory of legislative policy and other compliance. So I would suggest that every organisation, public, private, makes no difference, have a very, very clear and very precise idea of exactly what their minimum compliance standards and internal or external policy mandates are. There should be a central repository which has all that information. And also, public offerings may present a range of challenges to local government in respect of the various statutes, such as overseas cloud. The Patriot Act was just a bit of a myth, but anyway, that's the whole Patriot Act type discussion. And then also recognise that cloud may not eliminate the need for effective IT governance. Organisations that move to cloud to think they can do away with internal governance, they can, unless it's a single point application, can find some real challenges in that area. So also making sense of the federal level. There's a whole lot of Agima papers out there, a whole lot of guidelines, if APRA, you name it, they're all putting out little white papers or guidelines or whatever it is. Essentially the analogy is like drinking from the fire hydrant. To read all of this information and absorb all of it in the context of your business, you'd never get your job done. So, and this occurs both at a local level, international level, US government, UK governments, most governments are putting out at a federal level, putting out a lot of this information to say, here it is, go figure. What does that mean and how do you interpret that is the key. Standardization is something which underpins cloud because public cloud is built on the premise of standardization. Build once, use many times, and that tends to drive efficiencies and hence cost. It's all a numbers game. It's all a numbers game. The challenge lies, I guess, in ensuring that the life of the specified cloud system, if it can't be configured to meet a changing environment. So if you have a 3-year strategy and you've moved into the cloud now, or outsource or even internal, this rule applies as well. and then your requirements change, new legislation is dropped on you. In the private sector, you win a major contract which has got 50% new business, but it's got much more stringent privacy or whatever it is. Then you found that you've outsourced or you've moved your IT offshore or whatever, and you can't do that. That presents a problem to you. So how do you move away from or modify your particular cloud infrastructure applications if it doesn't comply with the new requirements coming along? So do you walk away from it, or do you try and negotiate? Understand where the real value in standardization. So the commodity levels, and that's typically things like email, file network storage. Those are the traditional kind of stuff which it's the platform infrastructure layers. Move your stuff onto Amazon or a government cloud or wherever it is, and you can do your network storage, you can do Dropbox type stuff out there, and that's all fine. But remember the earlier slide I had, the value proposition with software as a service, that's really the transactional layer is where the magic happens. So opportunities, moving on to opportunities. The real opportunities can be identified through this systematic and deliberate attention to what's possible, rather than rather than for a solution to fix a problem. So I want to try to just put the cart before the horse, or the horse before the cart is the question. Cloud can certainly, in the right hands, in the right situation, significantly lower your IT operational costs. And that is not always the case. It is in some instances. Faster delivery of projects, because you're not constrained by some of the legacy. You've got to buy stuff, you've got to build it, you've got to configure it, you do all that sort of stuff. It's done automatically up front, or it's transparent. So one of the things with that is increasing the agility, because you can just configure a system. You just configure it, you go into the console and you say, I want to deploy a new server, call it this, tick the box, bang. 5 seconds later or 1 minute later, it's done. So you can do that from home, you can do it from anywhere. So it's very, very flexible, and it allows you to configure rather than code. That comes with obviously limitations. Universal access to smart systems using, smartphones. And particularly with ratepayers, everyone's got an app. They want to see an app on their phone or whatever it is to do whatever. What sort of services can be delivered, and how can they be delivered? Improved coordination is implied, and also lends itself to pilot project proof of concept. And one of the key things in my experience is setting the expectation that a pilot project is in fact a pilot project, and that if you do get a pilot project to actually prove a concept using cloud technologies, there's sometimes a lot of effort required to stop the organisation from just launching it, because you're doing it as a proof of concept. That analogy that it's finding very, very great, everyone loves it and they just want it tomorrow, it needs to be a defined point where, so you can then, if it doesn't work, you just switch it off, you haven't lost much. So it's a very, very, very powerful way of doing proof of concepts to test business models and or IT systems. Some of the pitfalls, probably these are not necessarily in any particular order, but the lack of clarity over which organisational problem needs solving by the application of the next best thing. And this is where the whole emerging technologies is seduction game out there. We've got a solution we'd like to grab and put in because we think it's going to solve the problem. And also fragmented localised cloud systems can actually increase the systemic risk, because you've got one less element of things you can control. You might bolt together various systems internally. You might have an Excel spreadsheet which has got ODBC driver to some Access database which has got access to Oracle, whatever it is. You've got a chain of stuff and you can control it. You can do it completely internal. I'm not saying it's efficient or effective. I'm just saying, and you compare that to what's out there. You can't necessarily control aspects of that. Vendor predation, and also individual stakeholders, influential stakeholders particularly, have opinions. The CEOs in the golf club, they chat to themselves, I've got a mate who's done this application, it's fantastic, we love it. Guess what? Your CEO is going to come back and say, I've got an application for you, can we install it by next Thursday? So mitigating that, and it's really no substitute for a good, balanced, well-informed commercial decisions. And this is where the influence of IT managers and CEOs is really critical to be able to influence this discussion in a sensible sensible manner. Adopting cloud without knowing your exit or transition out strategy is really critical. The metaphor has been used multiple times in multiple conferences, and essentially the analogy is like flying a light aircraft. Flying into the cloud is fine, it's how you come out of it is the key. And my suggestion to any organisation looking at a cloud solution is look at your exit more carefully than you do your entry. In other words, at what point do you break your contract? Can you break your contract if your preferred provider today is going to be bought by an overseas multinational in a year's time and you've got a 3-year contract with it? Does that fundamentally change your relationship? These are the sort of issues that need to be considered in terms of the transitioning out or strategy. Inappropriate pre-purchase due diligence leading to real problems, and I put real in bold and italics. It's real cash problems, real cash and real governance problems. One of the organisations that I've alluded to in the research that was done last year breached some governance, legislative governance quite significantly because they had no control over it. They didn't do the due diligence because it was like the organisation was just herding IT down the funnel of Go Cloud, and they had no choice to do it because it was such an emotive issue. Lack of visibility of total cost of ownership, and I mean total cost of ownership includes everything. Internal data centre, internal contracts, you name it. The entire cost recovery, TCO needs to be done. Legal and jurisdictional issues are something which is hotly debated. Overseas cloud providers, there's a lot of mythology about that. Some of the other pitfalls relating to integration, which I've alluded to, can be very complex. Gartner once again came out with some stats that it can be up to 50% of your cloud project when you get to integration can be the cost of, the cost of the actual increase of the cost of actually doing the project. Security, business continuity as opposed to disaster recovery. Identity management is a real issue. If you have your identity management, say, in an internal LDAP kind of structure, how does that federate? How does it get secured? Where you manage your identity management so you get single sign-on properly across the enterprise? That's not necessarily trivial. Forensics, if you have this subject to e-discovery, legal case, whatever, if you switch cloud providers, where's all the data? It might have been spread around the universe. Contract complexity, quite a few things. So this is my last slide, and I'll take a few questions. So what I'd like to do is just present a view that cloud computing is only one of a number of new and emerging technologies. We have access to a range of information and services, and how it's being used is a broader question. Identify what problems we've been trying to fix and identify the solutions. So this is a classic, this is business 101, is what is the problem we're trying to fix? Because the highway of IT projects in the enterprise level is littered with the carcass of failed projects, because invariably technology has been put ahead of the business problem where we're trying to solve, and where that occurs presents risk. And I caveat that with certain innovative technologies lead business transformation, lead business change. So I'm not being totally pragmatic, I'm just saying if it's your money, if it's your family money in your business, are you going to spend $1 million, $500,000, $500,000 on this you-built thing and hope you're going to get money back? That's what I'm trying to do, be pragmatic in that sense. I would suggest cloud, especially public cloud, should not be your default position. Should not be your default position for all the reasons I mentioned previously. And the most important weapon of choice in the whole the battle to get from the current state to the future state is effective due diligence. Effective due diligence of your cloud ecosystem or your any other ecosystem is really critical to mitigate your future technical and systemic risk. So this is what I'm trying to do, is suggest that your risk is perceived actual risk is low initially, but in year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is, are you setting yourself up for that uncapped or unidentified risk, which is not an easy thing to do, but there are quite a number of methods to do that. So on that note, I'd like to thank you for staying awake, and I'm glad to take a question or two. Sure.
Yep. Thanks for that. I mean, with the last two presentations, I think I've got a very clear understanding now of what is the right problem. To me, a lot of the cloud stuff seems to be that you talk about cost and value. The issue with the cloud and what you presented is around the cost part.
Yep.
And that's what the focus seems to be about traditionally. But what hasn't been mentioned is I'm actually interested in business capability.
Yep.
And one of the big things that has happened in the change of computing is the app model.
Correct.
So apps don't have version numbers. Apps, I get increased functionality, and Gmail's the same, right?
Yep.
So I subscribe to a service for mail capability
Yep.
because I need that for the business, and I get new capability, new features added,
Yep.
and there are no upgrades. There are just new things added later
Yep.
on. So I'm renting a service, paying for a service, and it happens to get new features added. I don't have a problem of like Exchange 2010,
Yep.
upgrading to Exchange 2013, and all the disruption and
Yep.
complexities
Absolutely.
of that. So it's about, so really what we're probably talking about is the value lies in the app model and the business capabilities they enable, and how do you achieve that on some type of IT service model.
I mean, absolutely. Where the focus where I'm saying is that largely within most organisations of size, there are typically the mission critical transactional layer stuff, which really when you're doing an app, it's delivering a portlet to users to log in and transact a very small window of the entire ecosystem of transactions. And what I'm focusing on is the entire business. The entire business would include that app model is a fraction of the total service delivery to the entire organisation. And undoubtedly that ability to push out upgrades and everything else, it's not unique to the app model. In fact, I would probably not necessarily question, but test the assumption that the app model, which is a client bit of software on your iPhone or whatever it is, that presents security risk rather than a properly rendered, mobile-friendly web portal which has got exactly the same functionality. The key difference is if you can manage it offline or not, because there's some security issues with having a lot of data sitting on a local PC. There's been some hacks, and the whole arms race between the good guys and the bad guys. There's been some hacks using, I think it's the GPS back channel to hive into information on smartphones and whatever. So that's, if you're in a high compliance environment, if you're dealing with really, really sensitive information, you need to be very cautious about those sort of things. But absolutely, from a ratepayer's point of view, there's nothing really super private about it. But absolutely, I think it's a very valid point.
With the context of, you mentioned duplication of benefit.
Yep.
And what's happening in the UK at the moment with open source and mandating use of open source, just be interested in your comments, how that relates to how we may grapple cloud later on.
Well, I think the mandates to use any particular technology from up on high are often done as a cry of help to get organisations to get their head out of the sand. And I think being a pragmatic, commercially oriented business kind of person, and I think there's the councils are no different to that. If you're going to spend money doing something, having a mandate to say you will use this, provided it's soundly structured, and it's got an executable business strategy underneath it, that's absolutely fine. But I think where there are mandates, sometimes you find at the UK government there might be a preferred. We have a strong preference which is speak for mandate, but they're not going to put a gun to your head and say we will expect you to be using open source or this particular thing, unless it's a national policy or something like that. And I see that in multinationals as well, overseas head office saying we're going to use this system, it's all great, and it comes down to the country level and they do a total cost of ownership and they say, well, this just doesn't make sense. The local boards say we're not going to spend 4 times the amount or 2 times the amount, we're not willing to take on change, we're not willing to use an overseas provider because we have got certain privileged sensitive information which we have got under contract with our clients to not have any of that data sitting overseas. That's a sort of reality when you get down to the details of specific installations, that it just doesn't make sense. So I hear what you're saying, and absolutely, I think it's a good thing to roll a hand grenade in the room and have people think about it. That's the value.
Just add to that, just because I think there's a couple of things with the UK model. So that whilst they've got a mandate, they've also then opened that up so that they've actually got a mandate, but they've actually opened it up to the market. So you can actually get a lot of different providers. I think it'd be interesting this afternoon when Jock talks to us about sort of what they've done in Queensland.
Yep.
Because some of the feedback that we've also got from the UK, whilst they've done that, is that whilst cloud is in its early stages, they've not necessarily got enough vendors in there to get the sort of leverage that they were expecting to get the prices of the big public contracts that they were expecting to come in there. So that's some of the feedback that we've got from some of the vendors we've been talking to from the MAV.
And that's a very valid point because,
So it's that journey, whereas Jock, and I think we'll hear from Jock later on this afternoon, where they've gone for a single solution up in the Gulf Cloud in Queensland, which has actually given them that ability to leverage to get the scale that they need rather than trying to divide that very little volume that they've got initially across a very thin audience. So I think it's part of a journey.
Isn't the value proposition in using the UK to use open source to reduce the duplication of effort, essentially? So as systems are developed and business...
well, if I could maybe just add to that, I think the issue, the open source issue in terms of reducing standardization, open source is only one of an array of elements in that whole equation. But I think the broader issue is what is the government or the entity trying to achieve? What is the ultimate objective they're trying to achieve, and what is the best technology? The other issue as well, because I do a fair bit of work in the vendor space, is the vendors themselves, not so much the majors who've got such inertia, they just tell you what to do. It's like the Soviet era, this is what you will get, period. And if you don't like it, take your business elsewhere. But for majority of cloud providers that are emerging, that they are also being challenged. They're trying to get their own business models. I mean, if you look at some of the work, some of the majors, that have transitioned from an on-premise, capital-intensive software purchase to an annuity, it's crucified their balance sheets. Instead of getting $50 million, $100 million a year up front for, future purchases, you're paying 10 grand a month. That's the kind of cash flow. It impacts, their cash flow. Not only that, but also a lot of the people in the cloud space that are selling solutions and services, it's actually quite hard for them to not only transition their own businesses, and I'm talking about legacy IT providers, less so startups, but also transitioning their intrinsic business proposition, but also assuring that an organisation that wishes to go with them, that they're going to be around. That's all part of it. So it's the whole thing is a juggernaut going down the road. So vendors, regulators, everyone's on the same train, and hopefully this presentation has given you some food for thought. And I would suggest, if you wish to have a look at the articles, I write quite a few articles, the conversation as well. We're talking about big data. I'm just putting it out there as the thought stuff, and if you agree, fine. If you don't, then fine. So put it out there. Thanks very much.